Did you know that traumas and unresolved issues of your ancestors could be wreaking havoc on your life today? Hardship that your grandparents faced could be coming up in your life right now to be healed. Your troubles with money, relationships, and health could strangely be connected with some relative in your lineage who was unable to resolve their own financial or marital challenge. And that issue of trauma is expressing itself in your life with bad luck or unfortunate circumstances or just feeling stuck. I would not have believed this until I saw Constellations Work unfold before my own eyes and the insights that people had as they connected with what's called the knowing field. Hello, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time to my channel. I'm Davina Kotulski, self-help author, psychologist, life coach, family constellations facilitator, and New Thought spiritual practitioner. This channel and myself, we are dedicated to the personal growth, spirituality, health, and well-being, and everything we talk about on this channel is about supporting our mind, body, and spirit on the journey to healing and transformation. Today, it's my pleasure to bring you the internationally known and beloved author and family systems constellation teacher and facilitator, founder of All My Relations Constellations, Francesca Mason Boring. Before we begin the interview, let me tell you a little bit about the amazing work Francesca has done. And I'd tell you a lot, but basically we'd never get the interview done because she has contributed so much. Francesca Mason Boring is a bicultural Western Shoshone woman enrolled with the Shoshone Paiute Tribes. Walking with the ancestors, Francesca introduces respect and the incorporation of ancient healing wisdom traditions and ritual in life and system constellations. Francesca facilitates family, human, and natural systems constellation and constellation as ceremony as transformational work. And Francesca works with universal indigenous fields in family constellation, and she has supported the development of constellation as ceremony, community constellations, and nature constellations. She's the author of at least 7 books, including my favorite, Connecting to Our Ancestral Past, Healing Through Family Constellation, Ceremony and Ritual. It is my pleasure to welcome Francesca to my channel and introduce or reintroduce you to this powerful form of ancestral healing. Welcome, Francesca, and thank you for being here and open to sharing more of your wisdom and teachings.
Well, I appreciate the invitation and I really appreciate your work. I had the privilege of going through your YouTube mana process, which I found very parallel in a lot of ways to constellation work, that it's so resource-based and acknowledging the blessings, acknowledging the positive things. And so I've been very touched by what you're doing and have actually been supported by it. So I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. It sounds like you did some of the 30-day mana challenge, and that's
Wonderful.
wonderful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
really
I appreciate
wonderful.
that. Well, I've also personally had the pleasure of being your student, which is why I'm a little bit nervous. Francesca is one of my mentors, and so sometimes when you get to connect with your mentors, it makes you a little nervous. But I was able to complete a year-long facilitator training program with you in 2021. It was scheduled for 2020, but we all know what happened that year. And I have a deeper understanding of constellations work based on going through your training and being a participant in facilitation, a participant of constellations. But for the viewers, could you give us a basic intro into family constellations work?
I'm happy to.
Great.
Family systems constellation is actually a modality. I love that Bert Hellinger, the developer of the work, eventually began to refer to it as um, himself, the developer, being a philosopher in service of life. And so there is something really beautiful about this perspective that looks at ways that we can look at our family system and identify where are those who have been excluded. Because what we've seen in this work is that we are born somehow with open hearts.
Mhm.
And so there is this unconscious, innate tendency to actually be loyal to those who have been pushed out or who have been shunned or excluded from our family system. What's amazing is that through this work, we've been able to see that sometimes those individuals who were pushed out, that we actually spend our lives remembering by instituting or adopting the patterns that have really been so destructive for them. We found that sometimes the patterns can really find the inception 10 generations back.
Oh,
So I
wow.
love to refer people to Anne Anselin Schutzenberger, who wrote a beautiful book called The Ancestor Syndrome. And
Mm.
in her work, she really researched, almost like a historian, to track people who had real difficulties and who could identify difficulties that were a pattern, a very specific kind of pattern. She actually documented some of those patterns having their inception
Mhm.
10 generations back with a really usually horrific trauma that wasn't recognized, and people had to survive. And so sometimes there wasn't really time to grieve or to process, or there was embarrassment, and the family would really pretend this never happened, this person never existed. So we've really found that there is this systemic dynamic in family systems
Mhm.
that can create all kinds of barriers and complications in terms of being able to have love relationships, being able to be successful at work, being able just to have a sense of peace. And one of the things I've found interesting is that for some folks who have, for instance, really a sense of anxiety, really uncomfortable anxiety, I really appreciate the phrase, ever since I can remember.
Mhm.
And often some of those folks will have no event, no personal trauma, but it's really something that just saturates their life. These are the kind of people that at times, when we do a family systems constellation, we can identify that that anxiety, that pain, that angst actually belongs to someone else who was forgotten or neglected, or who is asking, who a person kindly remembers through their own suffering.
I think this is so important because I wear a lot of different hats. I've been trained in a lot of different modalities. Obviously, spent most of my professional career in the field of psychotherapy, and which kind of goes back and forth between looking at things like the collective unconscious and which I think liken that to the field, to very cognitive behavioral, very linear, more pharmacological approaches to healing. And, in the last 20 or so years, the notion of intergenerational transmission of trauma and healing of that trauma has come up. And we've looked into epigenetics and how something that has happened to one particular generation is carried down, stress and, for example, mice, the mother mice. It's that stress shows up in differences 2 or 3 generations down. Obviously, we as psychologists, we've looked more deeply at the Holocaust, both the American Holocaust and the Jewish Holocaust in Germany and in Europe, and how folks carry their ancestors' pain and suffering. And yet here you're talking about like people might be carrying this anxiety and depression and they don't know what it's from. And when certain things don't work, right? We try cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever. It is interesting, and it's almost, even within my field, blasphemous to say this, but there may be things that don't relate to your current lifetime that are causing the depression and anxiety. And if that's coming up, I'm not saying that something's going to be a quick fix for you, but there are reasons to step into family constellations work that might accomplish something that therapy or, pharmacological interventions won't. And, again, I'll just briefly mention like the past life work I do. Sometimes people will come to me separately and they're like, oh, I've done this, I've been to therapists, I can't resolve this. And we identify it to something that's happened in a past life. Again, it could be something that's happened with an ancestor that you are taking with you. And so, like, we know about the Holocaust, the indigenous Holocaust, we know about the Jewish Holocaust and how that has impacted people. but there's things like what, like the potato famine. I mean, can you kind of maybe speak a little bit to some of the things that you've seen and why people would do this work and how maybe it's different from therapy?
Definitely. Maybe the primary differentiation
Hmm.
is that with systems constellation, there's not a focus on pathology.
Uh-huh.
So we're looking at systemic pressures, something that is within the family system. It can also be organizational system. It can also be an environmental system. But we're looking at what within the system creates a kind of a pressure that then results in what we might define as a symptom. And so when we look from a systemic perspective, what we see is those discomforts or those things that we might identify as disorders are actually a function of the system. So rather than a dysfunction,
Hmm.
they in fact systemically are a function. So it is that discomfort that someone has, that barrier that they consistently find in their lives, that was also a barrier in their father's life, that was
Hmm.
also a barrier in their grandfather's life. Very often there is an event or there was a person who was actually associated with that, that wasn't seen, wasn't recognized. So there, I think, are some distinctions, and the the lack of focusing on pathology, I think, is primary. And I think that it's one of those places that some fields in psychology begin to also reconsider what is a disorder. So,
Hmm.
for instance, some people that are affiliated with Veterans Association really prefer to say post traumatic stress
Uh-huh.
rather than to say post traumatic stress disorder,
Hmm.
because our brains, our bodies function in a way that's designed to protect us, that's designed to help us. And in systems constellation, we see that we're made in such a way that we also want to include and bring recognition and love and honor to those who had misfortune within our family system. So I think that there are some differences, particularly in the focus. And the other thing is that there is a difference in that our understanding or our experience is that the individual person is actually, and their system
Hmm.
is actually the place wherein what we might call healing lies.
Uh-huh.
So that system is really trying to find a way to bring inclusion and to bring peace and to bring balance. And so we really look at the person, the family system, even those things that are currently what we sometimes refer to as symptoms in mainstream
Hmm.
terminology. Um, all of those things are really by design a way that our family system and our own soul
Hmm.
tries to restore balance and inclusion and recover the ones in our family system who have really sort of been lost and embarrassed and judged. So it's a really very open um, process, and it does use structures that are fairly linear. Some people refer to it as the mapping of family systems when people represent, but there is a field, um, a knowing field
Hmm.
that actually allows the solutions and actually the inception of pain to reveal itself in the constellation.
So again, a part of my training has been family therapy and Bowen, Minuchin, some of those folks, and like looking at, yeah, what is the function of the symptom and why would somebody do what they're doing? And so I think that's very congruent with what we're talking about. But as you mentioned, psychotherapy has a tendency more to pathologize uh, the client, and the identified patient, so to speak. Just for, again, for the viewers, so with Constellations Work, you mentioned the field and you mentioned representatives. So, and I know there's different ways to do Constellations Work, but kind of one of the basics, right, is folks get into a circle. There's a facilitator, there's a group of participants. Someone sits in the chair and chooses to have a constellation done on their family system. And then the facilitator helps them pick representatives. And how does that process work?
Well, it's very organic,
Mhm.
and what has been amazing is that access to that process is universal. The work is really international. It's very cross-cultural. And so what we found is sometimes I've heard people say all you need is DNA. So this knowing that really encompasses everything that we do, I think is not unfamiliar. I always refer to the the experience that most people have
Mhm.
if you're in a grocery store and you don't know why, but you just feel like you need to look, and you can essentially feel someone is looking at you, and indeed they are. And from however great the distance, there is a connection. And there was an innate knowing
Mhm.
in each of us that somehow this connection was already happening, right? And the other thing that is so common that you might be thinking about someone all day, you're thinking about them. You could think about anybody in the world, but you're thinking about this one person, and you come home and they call.
Yeah.
So we really are connected in so many ways all the time. And I sometimes speak about universal indigenous because we all originally come from the tent. And there was a point in time when each of our cultures and each of our traditions was much more infused with this access to all of these kinds of connections. So it appears that in constellation work, we are accessing this deeper way of knowing that we're connected. And it is remarkable for many people. It's quite a surprise that someone who has never met them, who doesn't know them, when they're placed as a representative for them, or perhaps a representative for their father or their sister, their brother, when they're placed as representatives, there are times that there is a really uncanny representation by someone who does not know them.
Yeah.
It's different um, than having like the intention to help someone heal.
Hmm.
It's just simply being open. And at that point, there are times that people might, for instance, use a very specific phrase
Hmm.
that someone in the family uses, or sometimes references an event. It can be quite specific. However, even without the verbiage within the constellation, there can sometimes be an organic movement that really brings clarity about what the dynamics are. So it's not forced. It's not someone intentionally saying, I'm going to help this person feel better. So I'm going to move this way so that they'll feel better. It really is that each person who's present begins to have a knowing about what is really true in this family system. Where was the breach? Where was the bridge broken that really needs again to be repaired?
Thank you. Yeah. So just to kind of, again, kind of, so you're in a circle. The person who's having the constellation, through the help of the facilitator, picks someone to represent a family member, themselves, a dynamic, and then those people are just left to their own devices to connect into the field and then to look or move however they feel guided to do, right? There's no direction of that. And what's what's fascinating to me is that, okay, so I was, again, trained in family systems therapy, Virginia Satir's family sculptures, family psychodrama, where you told people, my dad's like this, my mom's like this was their dynamic, this was my younger brother, and almost gave them a script or an idea, and then people would work things out. This is nothing like that. This is completely organic, coming forward, like you said, from the DNA, just being the person's in the room and their field is expressing through these people, like the representatives, however this works, right? The representatives are that person's DNA is connecting with those representatives in that moment to bring forth these movements, these phrases, this understanding. And again, I've been a participant, I've been both a representative for other people, and it is amazing the emotion that shows up in your body, what you're drawn to, and how you are guided to connect with that person's ancestral field. And then what did I want to say about that? And then there's completely blind constellations where people don't even tell you what role, what you're representing, just like pick a representative. And then even with that, without knowing anything, you they know who you're representing for them, but you don't know who you're representing. And so it's amazing what comes forward. Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's had because it's been such an open table.
Hmm.
There are so many disciplines that have really come into constellation work because they really want to better understand systems because we're all working in and living in and a part of systems. So teachers and psychotherapists and medical practitioners and naturopaths, massage therapists,
Hmm.
foster parents, the the swath of disciplines and perspectives that have really drawn people to the work is quite amazing. As a result, there are many different disciplines that in some way have helped to inform the evolution and the growth of family systems constellation. So I just want to say when you mentioned the blind constellation, naturopaths, homeopathic practices, those that had the technique of
Hmm.
identifying allergies, writing, for instance, bee sting and placing it over the belly button and doing kinesiology and
Hmm.
seeing, does this in fact have an impact on a person's own physical system? And so, in seeing how effective that was for many people in terms of allergy elimination and identification of issues in homeopathy,
Hmm.
there was this what would happen if. And so it was one of those techniques that very easily fit into exploring systems constellation with no visible knowledge of what the issue was or who the person was representing. There was still this field that is cohesive and that is uh, informed. Some people refer to it as an informing field,
Mm.
um, as well as a knowing field.
Okay.
That it does somehow inform us in a really beautiful way of what dynamic might be affecting me. And
Mhm.
I think that's maybe a distinction because when we talk about the difference with psychotherapy and pathology, a lot of that is not practitioner driven, but it's industry driven. So, for instance, an insurance company is not going to pay a
Mhm.
therapist or a medical practitioner if they
Right.
don't have a diagnosis. So, if
Diagnosis
they
and
don't
disorder.
say
Yeah.
there's something wrong with this person,
Mhm.
there's not any way that they're going to recover funds. So one of the things that I think can happen is that in systems constellation, because there's not that pressure, there's also no such thing as a non-compliant patient.
Mm.
So each person really is um, trusted to sort of modulate, self-modulate. What am I able to integrate and what do I want to take? And the other part is that there is this elegant efficiency in the work in that I may come as a participant, really just to observe, and someone else may do a constellation looking at their family system that is really identical, completely parallel to something in my own system. So we have some very interesting things that happen when we look at patterns. For
Mhm.
instance, it might be that um, every one of my aunts, both of my grandmothers, um, any number of women in my family have been married, perhaps let's say 3 times, and the third spouse died. So there are some really uncanny patterns that
Yes.
show up in some systems.
Yeah.
And it might be that I come as an observer and my family system mirrors exactly what's being represented. So, without even asking for a constellation,
Yeah.
if I'm hesitant, it can be that within that circle, in a very specific way, I also am invited. It's nothing is mandatory.
Mhm.
I'm also invited to look at my system and to be able to honor what was excluded, to be able to honor the wounding, and then most important, to be able really to look at the resilience,
It's beautiful.
because we also have had this wonderful help, from other disciplines. Um, Neuroscience is something that has really been helping to understand some of the mechanics of constellation work and to help us better know how to support people in their integration. And so there are some things that um, well, I think I'll pause here because I have a whole thing about the excitement with all these other things that are coming in,
Uh-huh.
with neuroscience and being able to understand how challenging it is when we completely um, get caught in a hamster wheel regurgitating a particular trauma and turn it from a dirt road into a superhighway
Mm.
by sort of having it become almost a mantra. And so when we're looking, never ignoring that, never denying that, but when we're looking at behind that, where's the resilience?
Uh-huh.
How is it that our family survived? When we start to look at the resources that were present, um, then we know that we're not just trapped in that negativity bias, because we have this wonderful mechanism as human beings so that we could survive, that we don't forget being burned by a fire.
Mhm.
We, as human beings, only need to do that once,
Mhm.
hopefully, and our brain never forgets it so that we don't do it again.
Mhm.
But it has still that function with other things that happen in our lives. And so this work helps us to be able to look, what else is there? What else is there by the campfire? Good times and other people who were there and all of these other occurrences and events. And so we're able to widen our lens
Mhm.
that really, in a way, um, kind of shines the light a bit broader so that we're not just engulfed by that one event and
Uh-huh.
that one injury. Yeah,
So you mentioned earlier, like cutoff and people being scapegoated, cut off, distanced. There's a lot of that that goes on in societies and families. Um, can you speak maybe a little bit more to that, to the scapegoat, to how we hurt ourselves and how to remember
right,
and hold space for that?
right. I think that um, one of the really wonderful things is that we start to see that things like exclusion
Hmm.
come at a cost,
Hmm. Yeah, they do.
that we can direct our exclusion at someone within our family system. But that is not the only person who will bear the experience of exclusion.
Yeah.
And there is something about our family systems, some incredible wisdom that says everyone has a right to belong. Just by being born into this family, each person has a right to belong. And so when we deny that right, when we diminish full access, full participation, full membership, someone else in the family system very likely will come along who will also bear that pain. Again, not knowing, maybe never having had an experience of exclusion, but always having like an overbearing sense of being excluded, not being a part of. So, one of the things I think that in our day to day current
Mhm.
lives, when we're exposed to constellation work and family systems constellation, and this family soul, you could even say
Mhm.
that there is something that's bigger than, that really says everyone has a place. And so in our day to day lives, I think people are attuned to the fact that it may cost if I exclude someone in my family system. So
And
I may say
yeah.
that this person has terrible behavior or something terrible happened. However, that doesn't diminish or deny that they are a part of this family system. They belong.
And that's really hard for people who have experienced abuse from that particular family member, or continued abuse, and trying to find uh, how to stay connected while also having boundaries.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important that that constellation work is not a panacea that denies
Hmm.
reality. In fact, one of the sort of platforms is that in the whole of the work, we acknowledge what is. And so, very often, if there was abuse and if it was denied, that's the part that was excluded, was the truth of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to bring that in again without judgment,
Hmm.
looking at systemically, how did that happen? Why did that happen?
Hmm.
And so again, when we have neuroscience coming in the back door and helping us to understand the body and the brain,
Yeah.
we can know that, for instance, if somebody was in an environment where there were bombs falling for 3 years, 4 years, intermittently, without any chance of escape,
Hmm.
something happens to the brain. So the ability of that person to nurture a child and to have the guardrails that someone would have that had not had that experience,
Yeah.
that brain is a different brain. So to know that not all brains can nurture in the same way, and that's
Yeah.
not anything to judge, it's just something to acknowledge.
Hmm.
And then to say,
That
oh my
happened.
God, what a miracle. As much as that brain had to turn down so many functions,
Hmm.
still life prevailed.
Yeah. Still life
And
prevail.
so we really end up, I think, for many people, experiencing almost a sense of awe. How did that happen? How is it that we're alive?
Hmm.
So, again, when we have that broader view, um, I think there often is a kind of a sense of awe. How did that happen? As terrible as things were, how did these people survive?
And kind of with things like reparations, remembrances, acknowledgments on, as a society, again, we have created scapegoats, we have excluded people, we have denied people, we have skewed the truth. Do things like remembrances, acknowledgments, apologies, is that part of this kind of work? Could that be? I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
I I think that I want to see how to best phrase this.
Yeah.
I do think acknowledging what is
Hmm.
when things have not been acknowledged, it comes at a cost.
Hmm.
So we can see, particularly in the United States, different fissures or splits,
Hmm.
division that probably will keep coming up until historically we're able to acknowledge history.
Hmm.
So look at the places where there were these incredible schisms.
Hmm.
So when we look at for instance, the Civil War, more people died in the Civil War in the United States than the Vietnam War, Korean War, World War One, World War Two, all combined.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
more people died in that small piece of geography in the United States.
Hmm.
And many were family
They were
members,
brothers on brother.
right?
Yeah, brother to
And
brother.
so that split really, in many ways, there was not really the acknowledging, there wasn't really um, the honoring of both sides, the
Uh-huh.
tragedies of both sides. And I
Yeah.
think that that persists today. And then we have slavery, which right
Hmm.
now we have a very interesting kind of legislative process that is trying to extricate books and portions of history that have to do with Native American genocide or slavery so that people won't feel bad,
Hmm.
which we know systemically is not going to be an effective intervention. So, so
So it
the
continues to
acknowledging,
distort the family soul, the country's soul.
right.
Yeah.
So acknowledging those places where there have been atrocities is important.
Hmm.
And there's a kind of a nuance because it doesn't serve if it's a kind of a spiritual bypass.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I had an interesting conversation with a niece who's a very brilliant person, and she's really involved in becoming educated and is an advocate. And at a certain point, when she was invited by university after she got her degree to come and do a land acknowledgement, she said she felt in good conscience she couldn't because she said nothing changes. There's
Hmm.
not anything that's actually done that
Just a land
that really
acknowledgement.
honors. Yeah, and
Hmm.
so she said I was really respectful,
Hmm.
but as I sat with it and saw the trajectory of that process, I felt myself I needed to find a different way to contribute,
Uh-huh.
something that felt more genuine, that felt more to be an acknowledgement. So, yeah, so it's a very interesting thing, but I think that when something comes out of the knowing field, when it comes in constellation, that's why we've really experienced many times when a constellation evolves into what you could only call a ceremony or a prayer, that it really is touching a place that is so deep and so wounded. And we collectively begin to experience really a different path, something that really is healing, something that really is acknowledging, something that really is inclusive. And when that happens, it feels transcendent.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so I'm very engaged in that question. Um, which acknowledgments and recognitions serve
Hmm.
um, just societally,
Hmm.
and what might help to shore those up, what might strengthen them, because I think that at the seed of many of those there is a good intention.
Hmm.
So it's just is
But those things are what you're saying essentially too is that a land acknowledgement may not heal the ancestors. It may not be enough, but it's like what is something that is going to please the ancestors? What is going to put their hearts at peace?
Mhm.
And spiritual bypass, for those who aren't familiar, is kind of like maybe equivalent with toxic positivity. It's a way of really bypassing the emotional toll, the experience, and just going right into the positive with like, it's all good, it's all God, instead of like, what are what are the consequences? What are the experiences? So yeah, so spiritual bypass is just blasting on past that and not really being with the gravitas of what is being experienced.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that that's one of the things that um, that really is when at one point you were emailing the something about the great mystery.
Hmm.
And so I think that um, that larger field, that larger wisdom, I think it's probably why in constellation work, which is really unique. There is a place where people can place representatives for um, really greater forces. So, and we look at those as well. We look at um, things like war and things like natural catastrophes and things like atomic energy, and because those are a part of our families, those are a part of what has touched our systems and what has been a part of the lives in our families. So
Yeah.
we're able to look at those, and we're also able to look at what is a person's belief system.
Hmm.
Where are they resourced to be able to look at those historical greater forces, those pestilence and plagues and all of those things? Where do I place a representative for God? Or
Hmm.
where do I place a representative for Ganesh? Or where do I place a representative for the Great Spirit or Coyote or these other elements that also are a part of our system? And that's very separate from the institutional organism that a lot of people may have questions about, but really like that deeper bigger hands, however we define that. Um, we're in this work actually given a format that in some places, when people have been faced with so much catastrophe, we are actually able to bring in as a resource, um, sort of in the flesh, a human representative um, that is able to stand for and represent what is it that kept us alive?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Again, you have such a unique perspective, your own DNA, you know, being Shoshone, and a facilitator, and having that rich ancestry with the teachings of constellation. I'm just curious about that. How do you think that informs your work? Because I know that my world is informed by my ancestors, and the things that I struggle with that are going on in the world today are informed by what did my ancestors go through and my loyalty to them, and trying to see the big picture of everything. And so again, who we are, we bring that to the table. And
mhm.
just indigenous wisdom connected with constellations, kind of how do you think that influences your work?
It's definitely been an influence. Um, I I think I have been informed by um, indigenous traditions and elders, um, and also not just my own tribe, but I was fortunate to have worked in a community where there was a large number of different tribes represented, and so um, being young and having access to so many different voices that had really a lot of tribal wisdom and indigenous wisdom has been a big support for me as a facilitator of constellation work. It was one of the places where I very early on thought, how can we talk about our system and not include the natural world,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, as a resource? And so I was very fortunate because the early developers of constellation work were and are, if if nothing else, um, infinitely curious and open. And so when there were discussions, I had every invitation to include that.
Uh-huh.
And so to bring nature in as a resource, I think that's another place where it had a distinction from a field that was already developed and rather structured. So had I been, for instance, in a particular discipline of psychotherapy, there would be particular perimeters.
Mm-hmm.
But with this work, because it was really new and is still um, of a different philosophy in some ways,
Yes.
the sense that the field is actually going to inform what we'll be able to do and how far we'll be able to reach in terms of really being able to support people. So if homeopathy or if neuroscience or if art or any discipline has some support for this or some insight,
Hmm.
it's welcome. So that was different. That my own tribal questions and teachers
Hmm.
really had a welcome mat. And that was different. And then Sneh, Victoria Schnabel, was my first teacher in the work and was in her own way so unique. And so I'm ever grateful for that. And I think the other thing that helped, that has helped, is both of my parents came to Constellations and observed and had their own, um, interest and reactions and always supported. And my father's family, one side were immigrants to Canada, uh, excited, and really the story of opportunity was real. And his father's side, they were refugees from Lithuania. So I have within my family the immigrants and refugees and indigenous. And so um, I think my original worldview was rather expanded. So there was really a place and also this really wonderful um, comparative study from
Hmm.
early on. So I truly knew that we don't all grow up with the same fairy tales.
Hmm.
And the basic fiber, so without realizing it, I really was being mentored into sort of this very systemic view to know that what happened here is not necessarily what happened here.
Hmm.
And to be able to really, um, by some good fortune, sit with people as they start to look at their system, their
Hmm.
family system, and to be really open to and not judgmental about and not preempt what I think is present there, to be able to really welcome it and honor it. And again, just be amazed that this
Yeah.
human being and all of their family system and all of their ancestors have arrived at this place. It's amazing.
I think what you just said is really important too, to not preempt it, because what you think might be happening, you're probably wrong. Not you, but one. It's like we tend to like, oh, it's this. And
Yeah,
then you sit and you watch the and constellation unfold, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
oh, wow. Yeah. And so it's like it's not guesswork. It's not you solving the problem. It's letting the constellation reveal itself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So most of us kind of come to healing work because we have a financial problem, or we have a relationship problem, or a health challenges. Those are a health challenge. Those are sort of the three big things, right? Money, relationships, and health. Um, can you share maybe a little bit about how constellation work could address financial issues someone's having?
Definitely.
Mhm.
And if you don't mind, I'll kind of work in a very quick
Yeah,
little sort of meditation or process that a person can do because it's one of the things that I have gotten a lot of feedback that it actually has supported people. So
wonderful.
in constellation work, one of the things that we really become aware of is loyalty. That somehow, as children, um, going even into adulthood, we are loyal to the ones that were excluded. So I'd like to invite folks to think about, is there anyone in their family system who had difficulty with finances? Is there anyone who was, I love the term, financially embarrassed?
Mm.
So perhaps they were impoverished, perhaps they were separated from their wealth, perhaps they just struggled and were um, what some people refer to as dirt poor. Worked land and somehow worked hard and never obtained a place of comfort financially. So I'd like folks to just have a moment to think about anyone in their family system that might have had one of those experiences or something similar. And then you can imagine that you look at this person, or it might be that you just address them with your heart. Could be a grandparent that you've heard about, or aunt or uncle. It doesn't have to be parents or siblings. It could be someone even further back. Sometimes it's helpful to say to them, please bless me if I have an easier time than you. I honor everything that you did. I honor all of your difficulty. And I would like you to know that I'm here because of you. So it is my hope that you will consider yourself a success. I'm here. And I ask you to really look on me kindly. As I learn more about finances, as I do better financially, and I will remember you as I do, I will bring you with me. I will honor you as I do well. And thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've seen is there's a very different dynamic when we don't leave those people in
Mhm.
the dirt, but we rather bring them with us. Then we're not breaching any loyalty.
Mhm.
We really are serving them and helping them also to have a sense of this long trajectory of their life that continues even with us.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So that was something that as a facilitator, you can offer a group, or that would be something you could offer someone even in a one-on-one session. Can you speak maybe a little bit about the differences between one-on-one constellation work and group work and maybe some of the benefits or differences?
Well, I think that that's one of the really beautiful aspects of constellation work that we've found that it works as effectively
Hmm.
in one-on-one as it does in a group. So it can be on the phone, it can be in a one-on-one in-person session, um, and you can have, of course, a group, um, but there this field, this knowing field, is present whenever we're looking at the family system through this systemic constellations lens. And so there are things that can be revealed. It might not be that it's done verbally through a representative, but that's part of the reason that I guess training in constellation work and learning more about constellation work is helpful because there really are particular templates, particular dynamics that you can understand more clearly the more you know about the work. So it can be that some people use mats, some people use something akin to sand tray, but there's a different dynamic because it's informed by this particular um, family systemic field, this informing field.
Yeah,
So
the one-on-one, I often do kind of a sand tray approach. Yeah.
right,
Mhm.
right.
It's
And
really
it's
important.
just again amazing some of the things
Mhm.
that happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that I think that's a real incentive for folks who are practitioners to really avail themselves to learning more about family systems constellation because there are times that the the dynamic that's causing the difficulty is not really caused by one's own life or one's own personal memories. And in fact, sometimes we're almost led to create memories that would try to justify that. But if it is in fact systemic, if the pressure is coming from someplace else in the family system, then if one is a practitioner, it's really helpful to be able to look at that, to be able to widen that lens and understand more about actually including this informing field, or this knowing field, which is, um, it's not necessarily a linear concept, but it's very effective, and it's something that's been used universally through all of humankind, all the way up until modernity. So we have kind of this very strange, um, formulaic construct, uh, now in effect, that excludes, in many cases, all of these universal wisdoms that have really supported humankind for such a long time. And I shouldn't, um, sound as though I'm not hopeful, because I think clearly many different disciplines are, because we have people who are medical doctors that come to the training, and lots of different types of therapists and physical therapists. So I think that there, in many ways, is a kind of organic expansion of those disciplines
Yeah.
that include those things that also work. So,
Yeah, we
um,
just have such a dichotomy and an adversarial relationship between spirituality and science in this world, especially in this country. And so once, like you mentioned, the neuroscience scientist several times, once a neuroscientist studies it and puts their stamp on it, then it's like, okay, it's meditation, yes. Oh, this is very good, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
there's neuroscientists are looking at shamanic journeying and channeling and other aspects and menopause. And as they put their stamp on it, okay, then it's science. Now we can
yeah,
do it. But it is unfortunate that there's such an adversarial relationship between spirituality, ceremony, and science. And I remember when I was working in the prison as a psychologist and hearing about some ceremonies that were taking place outside, where, for example, if someone, these were ceremonies that took place in indigenous communities, if someone had come back from a war and had taken a life, or even if they had taken a life and been in prison and come out of prison, there would be a sweat lodge, there would be a ceremony, and there would be connecting with the soul of the person whose life had been taken, and honoring. And that is so powerful. And that's not a therapeutic Western intervention. And obviously, I'm going to say the ceremony way more powerful than the therapy. The therapy has a place, right, to discuss what happened, feelings, but the ceremony, I think, is where the real healing could take place. And it doesn't have to be one or the other, but the
yeah,
fact that ceremony and that kind of spirituality, other aspects of healing are not included, and it's this or that, it's black or white. It's such a detriment to ourselves, our communities, our clients, that we're not more integrated, and that it's going to take, again, some Western neuroscientists putting their stamp on it to go, oh yeah, this is legit. Or, again, an epigenetic, some other scientists saying, oh yeah, this is real.
yeah,
We don't have to wait.
yeah.
you
No,
know.
no.
Um,
Well, and I think
mhm.
that community element of ceremony is something that's definitely present in constellation work.
Yeah,
Um, for people who don't even know each other to come together in a place of non-judgment.
right.
And I often, um, include circle technology. So there is a place for every voice without judgment, without any critique,
Mm,
but really for each person from the level of the soul to be able to be present and to be able to support anything that happens in that circle. That community aspect is something that as human beings, it turns out we really need. So thankfully, all the places that do research start to see that many of these things that were at one point identified as superstition, or
mhm.
um, somehow not in keeping with particular spiritual traditions, or something pejorative, some kind of pejorative judgment, that many of those things like community are essential. for our well-being.
Yeah.
And so that is very much a part of also what happens with constellation work, that people that don't necessarily even know each other
Hmm.
somehow through whoever we are in our biology um, is able to actually represent and bring to clarity and honor a thing that has caused real pain, sometimes for many generations. That is just amazing that people are willing to do that and able to do that is really one of the amazing things about family systems constellation that that I
Yeah,
love.
it is. I mean, and in Constellations work, watched people resolve relationship issues, understand where their relationships issues have come from, where a health challenge has come from. One constellation I witnessed, someone was having water intrusion issues, and they were able to trace it back to problems started when the relatives came across the ocean, across the water, and
Mhm.
the losses. And so that was acknowledging that, then the water issues went away. I was in one with you where we looked at infestations of pests, and
Mhm. Yeah,
oh my goodness, just amazing. And it's not about the pests, it's about something that happened in the family lineage that is now
yeah,
expressing itself.
yeah. Well, and actually, when you mentioned at some point, um, the potato famine,
Mhm.
it's not exclusive to the potato famine, but we began to have a curiosity. The United States, country of immigration, is the struggle that the United States fairly uniquely has with weight. Does that have any relationship in the many systemic journeys that people had from so many places where there was really a lack of food, where they came hungry, and where even 3, 4, 5 generations later, people find themselves always hungry.
That's
So,
fascinating. That makes sense. Yeah. People come as refugees, they come seeking something better. Yeah. Starvation, poverty. Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So
never.
we have so much to learn, but
Yeah.
I'm grateful. I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Francesca. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I haven't asked yet?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would encourage people to read everything they can about constellation work.
Mhm.
Um, Come to your workshops for constellation work. Um, my website is all my relations,
Yeah, you mentioned that.
constellations.com.
Mhm.
I'll be giving a training in Portland, Oregon, in 2005. So I usually just give one a year, and always happy when more people become facilitators of this work.
Yeah, you're doing
It,
a training right now in Seattle, training facility.
yeah, we're finishing the
Huh?
Seattle training, so I'm very happy that that's another um, good kind of a good big bouquet of facilitators that will be able to provide constellations for a lot of people. And I just think there's not a discipline, not a person that can't benefit from availing themselves to experiencing family systems constellation, learning about it. There are now so many. Thank you for mentioning the one book there, but there are so many books about so many different angles
Mhm.
um, that can support people in their journey.
Yes, I have your other book here too, one of your other books here too, the Returning to Membership on the Earth Community. This is a great
Yeah,
book as well. Yeah.
yeah,
And you were just was it Portugal? Where were you at just
yes,
recently?
Portugal.
Portugal.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I know you're traveling internationally, but you definitely are on the West Coast and you do a lot of training on the West Coast. So you'll be in Portland, Oregon. What is it, March or?
yes. I believe it starts in March. It's on my website.
Okay, great.
The link is
MyRelations.com. Yeah.
yes, yes. So it's well, it's 7 segments, 21 days. It's rather significant commitment, but I really do feel that it tends to draw people that are already facilitators, already are really amazing healers and human beings that are deeply connected to wishing to be able to serve in a good way.
So you're going to
So,
actually do a facilitator's training in Portland, Oregon.
yes, yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just coming to do your weekend workshop. You're
No, no,
actually going to do a training. So if people are interested in becoming facilitators, they,
yeah,
okay, Portland, Oregon, because you usually go to Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles for just weekend trainings as well.
yeah,
Now
yes,
you're going to do it.
yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, we'll have to talk about that more offline.
I'm excited. I'm really excited. So this will be the
Congratulations.
first training in Portland. So
Yeah.
I'm I'm really happy for folks that will find that a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, again, you can go to Francesca's website, which is allmyrelations.com, to learn more and to see where she's speaking, and how you can get involved. And again, Francesca, I just want to thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours, but I know you have a life and you need to get back to that. But thank you so much for taking the time today to share your wisdom. And again, if you want to spend more time with Francesca, pick up all seven of her amazing books, and you can dig deeper and learn more about uh, nature constellations, about how the trees don't like to be planted in rows because they can't see over one another, and all the ways we can use this amazing, I guess I'll just call it technology, healing work to transform our lives and the lives of those around us. So again, thank you so much, Francesca,
Uh,
and I will see
Thank
you down
you.
the road.